Telling someone that you're playing a coffee lock, a Sorkadin, or a Gloomstalker assassin is all well and good for telling somebody about your build, but it doesn't do much about answering the question of what's your character. These 3 tips will help to give you a better answer to that question and help you improve your portrayal of your character along the way. Today's question was submitted by Open World Addict Zero, who's had trouble presenting his well-built characters in such a way as to get them accepted into various games that he's applied for because they've been just a build and haven't made that transition from build to character concept, at least not yet in a way that makes it attractive to a dungeon master. Thanks Addict Zero for the question, and thank you to our tank class supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon who voted for me to record this video instead of one of the many others in our tank class only polls. Before we get to the 3 tips, there are 2 sort of public service announcements that I think are worth mentioning when it comes to how to build a character in a way that's going to make it attractive to a group that you're trying to join. The first of those is to remember a principle that I really didn't think of as being the case until I started working on this video and started talking with a number of different players of mine that use very scripted or planned builds and then transform those into their own characters and the concepts that they portray, and they generally do a really good job of it. The first thing to really keep in mind is that your mechanics and your character are honestly in a lot of ways separate creatures. Any kind of build and any kind of character can mesh together to create something new, because your character concept is really about the story that your character is trying to tell, its personality, its thoughts and choice making, both abilities and proclivities, the way that you're likely to portray the character. Your portrayal of that character will be adjusted by the kinds of skill set that you have available to you, but one and the other don't automatically go together. Not every coffee lock is going to be the same. Not every Sorkadin is going to be the same. Not every barbarian is going to be the same. Every single one of your different classes, every single one of your characters is going to come out very, very differently at the table, and that's going to be based mostly upon their story and the arc that they're on. The other announcement, this one much more of a public service announcement, is that if you're trying to join a group and you really want to get involved in a good game of Dungeons and Dragons, then by all means beware selfish builds, because there's a ton of them that have been put out there for people that are trying to min-max the numbers in order to make that one individual character unassailable or amazing all on its own, so that in solidarity, that's not even a word, on its own alone, it's able to deal with whatever problems it might be facing, whether that's because it's trying to survive and be the toughest thing that it can be, or whether it's because it's trying to put out so much damage that solo it takes care of everything, or whether it's trying to have the wild utility option of just being able to deal with every situation. These kinds of builds don't lend themselves to be attractive to a dungeon master because they're innately not teamwork related builds. So if you're having trouble getting into a great game, consider finding a build that's all about making other people as awesome as possible and show that to a DM, and I would be amazed if your success rate of getting into a game didn't go up just on that alone, if that's a trouble that you're feeling. But no matter what the build, you can improve it with a couple of simple things, and the first of those would be by, oh my goodness, hard concept, building a good backstory. I know that backstories are a bit of a topic for some DMs, because there's a lot of DMs who don't prefer to have a good backstory submitted to them. They really don't want to have a story before the game starts, and that's an understandable style. There are other DMs like me that want you to write out a great backstory with as much information about your past as possible, but don't necessarily want you to have written out a story that involves you having already saved the world a few times and having every answer closed, etc., etc. So writing a good backstory can be a real art and can take a little while. But the portion of a backstory that's going to help you with the immediate creation of your character concept is what I call the identity statement. And so, crafting a backstory that has an identity statement that you can summarize into it is the key way to make a character that makes that transition from build only into character concept. And your identity statement should run something along the lines of this: I am a build with flaw who wants motivation but also wants other motivation. Let me break that down. It's fairly simple. The first one is obviously the build that you've selected that you want to make, mechanically speaking. Then a role-played flaw, something about the character that is their weak point, their weakness. I've done a couple of things about this on various videos before, but essentially your flaw should be the kind of thing that pops up on a regular basis and is going to inform the decisions that you're going to make. It doesn't have to be a flaw that's just a flat-out bad thing, but instead could be a good thing that's taken to an extreme in order to become a setback, like just blunt honesty can be a flaw in many situations. Pick yourself a flaw that is going to help you define the character. Motivation, obviously the reason that your character is out there adventuring and not just sitting at home enjoying a nice cup of tea. What that big reason is that drives them and pushes your decisions forward. Whether it's a decision or a motivation that is something that could be ended, like finding the killer of your father and bringing them to justice, or whether it's something more ephemeral like seeking power or learning and gaining knowledge. Whatever the case, that motivation should be something that drives your character and should be in the forefront of your mind as you play, and when you present it as a character, it is actually the answer to the question of who's your character, is this identity statement. Your contrasting motivation, on the other hand, should be a secondary motivation that also drives your character forward, but in some way can clash with your main goal. For instance, you might be seeking after the killer of your father, but you might also have the motivation to live an honorable life. And so there might be some things that you won't do in order to discover who killed your father and to bring them to justice. And those conflicts will create great role-play moments for you at the table. And so finding two motivations that somehow clash just a little bit with one another creates a much deeper character and deeper story than you would have got otherwise, and thus becomes a more attractive character and story than you might have otherwise presented. The second thing that you can do in order to improve your character concept and make it more attractive is to explain for yourself and to others the build choices that you've made. There are a lot of builds out there that seem kind of wacky when you put them together, and I've seen people trying to portray them without actually having any explanation for why they're playing this monstrosity with all these different character choices that have led them to being a 1-level paladin, 2-level sorcerer, and 3-level warlock on their path towards bringing their build to its top potential. And frankly, that's something that you just have to nip in the bud by explaining what your choices are in your world situation instead of just creating it as a build without any sort of care for the narrative. If you can't explain the choices that your character is going to make in terms of what their class progression is, then you might want to consider rearranging some of the levels and making a less optimized character that still gets to the same point, so that it makes sense along the way and or is more fun to play along the way. Because there are definitely character builds out there that at level 3 or 4 or 5, when the game is just getting good for a lot of the other characters, is, shall we say, lackluster in play for you who is stuck with this multi-classed monstrosity that hasn't yet come online like it will at a certain level. Avoiding that problem is definitely worth it. Explaining your build choices also means explaining how you're gaining the new skills, and that brings us into point number 3, which is to telegraph your build choices as well. By taking a little bit of time to think ahead to what's coming in your prescribed build and weave that into your story and narrative, to weave it into either your backstory when you're trying to submit a character for approval, to show what they're working on and telegraph where that's going to lead, or in your portrayal of the character where you focus on working on new skills, or you are in meditation with some strange power, or distracted by whispers from your magical sword. Hello, Hexblades. Whatever the case might be, telegraphing your choices goes a long way to improving the degree to which your character feels like a character instead of a bag of mechanics thrown together. Open World Addict Zero, I hope that this has been useful to you. Thank you for submitting the question, and thank you for everybody else for watching all the way to the end of this. You are my favorite. And if you'd like to drive the narrative and decide what's going to get voted on, then please consider joining either here on YouTube as a supporter in the tank class, or over on Patreon likewise. Either way, thanks for watching. Happy adventuring.